Picture a scene from any film or book set in the Middle Ages. What do you see? Towering castles, knights in shining armor, dark forests, and most likely a peasantry depicted as grimy, mud-caked, and exuding a certain persistent aroma. The stubborn image we've inherited of the medieval period is one of widespread filth, an era where bathing was a rarity, if not an entirely unknown practice for the majority of the population. We are shown people living in a state of repellent squalor, rarely, if ever, washing, allowing pests to thrive and diseases to spread unchecked. It's a powerful image, one deeply embedded in our collective imagination. Tonight, we are going to dive into this common misconception, and you may be surprised by what we find. Because the reality of bathing habits in the Middle Ages is far more nuanced, complex, and, in some ways, surprisingly sophisticated. Not only did medieval people bathe, but bathing was a significant social and cultural activity with its own rituals, its own codes, and a fascinating history that evolved dramatically over the centuries. Far from being repulsive creatures who shunned water, medieval folk had a relationship with cleanliness and hygiene that is worth rediscovering. Now, before we explore the lively public bathhouses, the private rituals of lords, and the growing suspicion of water itself, take a moment to get comfortable for the night. If you are intrigued by deep dives into history and debunking of persistent myths, please feel free to leave a like on the video and to subscribe for more explorations. And as always, I would love to know from what part of the world you're listening tonight and what time it is in your corner of the globe. Let me know in the comments if you feel so inclined. It is always fascinating to see our community of nocturnal history lovers spread across the world. All right, let the troubles of the day fade away. Dim the lights. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself transported to a world where water had a very different meaning than the one we give it today. A world where the legacy of a lost empire still shaped customs, and where the cleanliness of the body was intimately linked to the health of the soul. To understand bathing in the Middle Ages, it is essential to look back to the Roman Empire, whose fall left a profound imprint on all of Europe. The Romans, of course, were famous for their magnificent public bathhouses, or thermae. These vast complexes were much more than just places to get clean. They were bustling social centers, places for meeting, for relaxation, for exercise, and even for intellectual debate. The Roman baths were a symbol of civilization, of engineering, and of a certain idea of public well-being. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, these grandiose structures fell into disrepair, victims of a lack of maintenance and the social and political upheavals of the era. However, the culture of public bathing did not disappear entirely. It persisted, transformed, and adapted to new realities. In some regions, particularly those that had been heavily Romanized, remnants of the Roman baths continued to be used, albeit on a much more modest scale. New forms of public baths emerged, often smaller and managed by local initiatives or guilds. These establishments retained some of the social function of the Roman thermae, but with a different atmosphere, more intimate, and at times more surprising to our modern standards. The tradition of bathing, even after the fall of Rome, remained an integral part of daily life for many people across Europe. Far from a sharp break with hygiene, the Middle Ages saw a continuation and evolution of bathing practices shaped by new cultural, religious, and medical influences. To truly understand the bathing habits of the Middle Ages, we must first understand their relationship with water itself. For the medieval mind, water was not merely a chemical compound used for cleaning. It was a powerful, symbolic, and deeply mysterious element, charged with both divine and dangerous potential. The most profound and sacred role of water was, of course, in the Christian faith. The act of baptism, the ritual that washed away original sin and welcomed a soul into the Christian world, was a total immersion in water. This act imbued water with a powerful spiritual significance. It was a medium of purification, not just for the body, but for the soul.
This belief in the spiritual cleansing power of water would echo through many of the bathing practices of the era. To bathe was not just to remove dirt, it was, in a small way, to perform a personal ritual of purification, to wash away the grime of the world and emerge renewed. But the medieval view of water was also deeply rooted in the medical theories of the time, which were themselves a legacy of the classical world. The dominant medical theory throughout the Middle Ages was the doctrine of the four humors, a system of medicine inherited from the ancient Greeks, particularly the physician Galen. This theory held that the human body was composed of four essential fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A person's health, and even their temperament, was believed to be a direct result of the balance of these four humors. A healthy person had their humors in perfect equilibrium. Illness, on the other hand, was the result of an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one or more of the humors. Bathing was seen as a crucial tool for maintaining this delicate balance. Water, particularly warm water, was believed to have a powerful effect on the humors. A hot bath could open the pores of the skin, allowing excess humors to escape and restoring balance to the body. It could soothe aching muscles, a common complaint in a world of hard physical labor. It could warm a body that was considered too cold and moist due to an excess of phlegm. Different types of water were believed to have different properties. Spring water was considered the purest and most healthy. River water was good, but less so. And standing water in ponds or marshes was seen as dangerous and corrupt, capable of transmitting disease through foul vapors or miasmas. The quality of water mattered. Finally, the medieval relationship with water was one of pleasure. In a world that was often harsh, cold, and uncomfortable, the experience of immersing oneself in warm, scented water was a profound and accessible luxury. It was a moment of relaxation, of sociability, and of a simple sensual pleasure that was not necessarily seen as sinful in the earlier medieval period. The bath was a place to escape the hardships of daily life, a small, warm, and wet pocket of comfort in a cold and difficult world. So when we picture a person in the Middle Ages, we should not imagine someone who was afraid of water. We should imagine someone who saw water as a complex and powerful force, capable of cleansing the soul, balancing the body, and providing a rare and welcome moment of pleasure. It is this complex relationship that gave rise to the strange and often surprising bathing habits of the Middle Ages.
Having left the cold reality of the medieval street, you find yourself before a different kind of establishment. It is a large, timber-framed building, perhaps in the merchants' quarter of the city. A simple, carved wooden sign hangs above the door, depicting a wooden tub, a clear and welcoming symbol for the weary traveler or the city dweller seeking warmth and cleanliness. From within, you can hear a low, pleasant hum of conversation and laughter, a sound very different from the harsh shouts of the marketplace. This is a public bathhouse, known colloquially in England as a stew. You pay a small fee at the entrance, a few pennies for a simple bath, a little more if you wish to have a meal or other services. You are shown into a changing room, a small antechamber where you can leave your outer clothes and your valuables in a locked chest, a necessary precaution in such a public space. You are given a simple linen loincloth for modesty. You then step through a second door, and you are hit by a wall of warm, moist, and fragrant air. The atmosphere is thick with steam, which hangs in the air like a dense fog, softening the light and blurring the shapes of the people within. The air smells of hot water, of the herbs that have been thrown into it, lavender, chamomile, and mint, and of the clean, wet wood of the great tubs. After the filth and the stench of the street, it is a paradise of the senses. The main bathing room is a large open space with a high timbered ceiling to allow the steam to circulate. The floor is covered with wooden duckboards to prevent slipping. In the center of the room are the baths themselves, huge round wooden tubs like oversized barrels, each one large enough to hold several people. The water is heated by a furnace in an adjacent room, the hot water piped in through lead pipes, a surprisingly sophisticated piece of plumbing that is a direct legacy of the Romans. The room is filled with people, and the first thing that might shock a modern observer is that in many of these establishments during the High Middle Ages, the bathing was mixed. Men and women, often naked or wearing only simple linen cloths, share the same tubs. The atmosphere is not of lewdness, but of a relaxed, casual sociability, much like a modern-day public swimming pool or a sauna. You see people from all walks of life. A group of wealthy merchants, their soft, well-fed bodies a stark contrast to the lean, muscular frames of the artisans and laborers who are also enjoying the bath. You see a group of women, their long hair pinned up to keep it out of the water, chatting and laughing. It is a great social leveler. In the steamy, anonymous warmth of the bathhouse, the rigid social hierarchies of the outside world seem to soften and dissolve, if only for a little while. The primary purpose is, of course, to get clean. Attendants, known as rakers, are on hand to scrub your back with a rough cloth and a soft soap made from animal fat and wood ash, a luxury that many cannot afford at home. But the bathhouse offers much more than just a bath. It is the social center of the neighborhood, a place to relax, to do business, and to be entertained. You see a barber surgeon has set up a small station in a corner, offering shaves, haircuts, and even bloodletting for those who feel their humors are out of balance. The sound of his razor on a leather strop is a sharp rhythmic counterpoint to the gentle splash of the water. Along one wall, long wooden tables have been set up, some of them placed directly over the tubs themselves, allowing the bathers to eat and drink while they soak. Attendants move through the steam, carrying trays laden with food and drink, roasted chicken, bread, cheese, and pitchers of wine and ale. The bath was a complete sensory experience. In one tub, you see two men, their bodies submerged to their chests, playing a game of chess on a wooden board that floats between them. Their faces are masks of intense concentration. The strategic, intellectual game, a strange and peaceful contrast to the relaxed social atmosphere around them. This was the strange and, to us, surprising reality of the medieval bathhouse. It was not a place of quiet, private hygiene. It was a loud, social, and multi-purpose institution. A place that was part spa, part tavern, part social club, and part business center. It was a vital and much-loved part of medieval urban life, a warm, wet, and welcoming heart in the midst of the cold, hard city. As you soak in the herb-scented water, your muscles slowly unknot from the tension of the city street. You begin to appreciate the full range of services that the bathhouse offers. This is far more than a place to wash. It is a one-stop destination for grooming, for minor medical procedures, and for socializing. Your attention is drawn to the corner where the barber surgeon has set up his station. He is not just a barber. He is a respected craftsman, a member of a powerful guild. His stall is a hub of activity. You watch as a wealthy merchant, his face half covered in a thick lather of soft soap, leans his head back, completely at ease, as the barber deftly glides a sharp straight razor across his throat. The trust is absolute. After the shave, the barber might offer a haircut, or even more specialized services like ear cleaning or tooth pulling for those in agony. Another of the barber surgeon's primary functions is bloodletting. You see another man, his arm extended over a small brass bowl, wince slightly as the barber makes a small, clean incision on the inside of his elbow with a sharp lancet. A thin stream of dark venous blood trickles into the bowl. This is not seen as a brutal or desperate act. It is a routine medical procedure, a way of maintaining health by balancing the body's humors. To release an excess of hot and moist blood was considered essential for preventing fevers and a host of other ailments. The man's face, though pale, seemed relieved, as if a great pressure had been released from his body. The bathhouse attendants, the rakers, are in constant motion. They bring fresh, hot water to top up the tubs. They offer their services to the bathers, scrubbing backs with rough cloths or performing a popular treatment known as cupping. You watch as an attendant places a series of small, heated glass cups on a man's back. As the air inside the cups cools, it creates a vacuum, pulling the skin up into the cup in a tight, reddish dome. This was believed to draw out the bad humors, the sickness from the body. But the bathhouse is not just a place of health and hygiene. It is above all a place of leisure. As the afternoon wears on, the atmosphere becomes even more relaxed, more convivial. The steam is thick in the air, the sound of conversation and laughter grows louder. More wine and ale are served. You see a group of merchants, their bodies pink from the heat of the water, deep in a discussion about the price of wool. A deal is being struck, a business alliance forged here in the informal, relaxed atmosphere of the bath. It is the medieval equivalent of a modern-day business lunch on the golf course. However, this relaxed, mixed-gender environment has a darker side, a side that gives the stews their often infamous reputation. While many bathhouses were respectable establishments, many others openly doubled as brothels. You notice women who are not here simply to bathe. They move through the steam with a practiced, confident air, their laughter a little louder, their glances more direct. They are the stew maidens, the prostitutes who work within the bathhouse. The practice is often not just tolerated, but officially regulated by the city authorities. It is seen as a necessary outlet for the city's male population, a way of containing vice within a specific, controlled environment. You watch as a man quietly beckons to one of these women. They share a cup of wine, their conversation a low murmur, and then they disappear together into one of the small, private chambers that line the upper gallery of the bathhouse. This is the side of the bathhouse life that draws the ire of the church. The moralists and the preachers of the day rail against the stews, calling them dens of iniquity, places of lust and sin that corrupt the soul even as they clean the body. But for the average city dweller, this is simply a part of life. The bathhouse is a place that caters for all the needs of the body. The need for cleanliness, for health, for food, for drink, for sociability, and for carnal pleasure. It is a microcosm of the medieval city itself, a place where the sacred and the profane, the wholesome and the sinful, exist side by side in a steamy, complex, and deeply human embrace.
As the afternoon light begins to fade, a subtle shift occurs in the atmosphere of the bathhouse. The frantic energy of the day gives way to a more languid evening mood. The steam seems to hang heavier in the air. The conversations become softer, more intimate. This is the time when the bathhouse is at its most social, a warm, wet, and welcoming womb against the encroaching chill of the medieval night. You stay for what feels like a long time, soaking in the warm water until your skin is wrinkled and soft. You feel cleaner than you have felt in weeks. The grime of the city, the dust of the road, has been washed away. The aches in your muscles have been soothed. But more than that, you feel a sense of psychological renewal. You have spent a few hours in a place of warmth, of comfort, and of human sociability. It is a powerful antidote to the harshness and the anonymity of the world outside. But you cannot stay forever. You are a traveler, a person of no consequence, and your few pennies will only buy you so much time in this temporary paradise. With a sense of reluctance, you finally pull yourself from the warm embrace of the water. An attendant hands you a clean, rough linen towel.
You dry yourself, the coarse fabric a pleasant, invigorating friction against your clean skin. You return to the antechamber and retrieve your clothes from the wooden chest. They feel stiff and slightly damp in the humid air, and they still carried the faint, familiar smell of wood smoke and your own journey. As you dress, you are once again putting on the armor of your social standing, preparing to re-enter the rigid, hierarchical world of the medieval street. You step out of the bathhouse. The air outside is cool and sharp. The noise of the city, which had seemed so overwhelming just a few hours ago, now feels slightly less aggressive, its edges softened by your own sense of renewed well-being. The bathhouse, you realize, is more than just a place to get clean. It is a vital and deeply necessary part of the fabric of medieval life. It is a place where the community can gather, where the barriers of class can, for a brief moment, be relaxed. It is a place of comfort for the weary, a place of healing for the sick, and a place of pleasure for those seeking a brief escape from the hardships of their lives. It is a testament to the fact that, contrary to our modern myths, the people of the Middle Ages were not a grimy, unwashed horde. They were people who, like us, understood the profound and simple power of warm water to cleanse not just the body, but also the spirit.
While the public bathhouse offered a world of steamy, democratic sociability for the city dweller, the experience of bathing for the high nobility was an entirely different affair. For a great lord or lady, the bath was not a public outing. It was a private, luxurious, and highly ritualized ceremony, a testament to their wealth, status, and separation from the common throng. Let us step inside the stone walls of a great castle, into the private chambers of the lord. The bath is not a permanent fixture, not a room with a sunken marble tub like in ancient Rome. It is a temporary, portable luxury, an event that is prepared and assembled with great effort by the household staff. The process begins in the castle's bustling kitchen. Great cauldrons of water are hung over the roaring fires, slowly heated to the perfect temperature. This is a significant expenditure of firewood and labor. While the water heats, servants prepare the lord's private chamber, or sometimes a dedicated, smaller room known as a stew or bathing chamber, if the castle is a modern one. They bring in the centerpiece of the ritual, the bathtub. It is a magnificent object, a large, deep, oval-shaped tub made of expensive oak or cedar, bound with polished iron hoops. It is a piece of fine craftsmanship, a symbol of wealth in itself. But the bare wood will not touch the lord's noble skin. The servants first line the entire tub with a clean, fine linen sheet, the white cloth draping over the sides, creating a soft, clean barrier. Next, the water is brought up from the kitchen. A long procession of servants carrying heavy, steaming buckets. They pour the hot water into the tub, the steam filling the room with a pleasant, warm humidity. But it is not just water. The lady of the house, or her chief lady-in-waiting, will add fragrant herbs to the bath, their scents infusing the steam. It might be lavender for relaxation. It might be chamomile and mint for their clean, refreshing scent. Sometimes flower petals, roses, or violets are scattered on the surface of the water, creating a beautiful, fragrant, and utterly decadent scene. While the bath is being prepared, the lord or lady is disrobed by their personal servants in the privacy of their bedchamber. They are wrapped in a large, warm linen towel and led to the bathing room. The room itself is prepared for comfort and luxury. Heavy tapestries are hung on the stone walls to keep out the drafts. A thick woolen rug is placed on the floor beside the tub. A small wooden stool is placed nearby, holding a silver goblet of spiced wine and a plate of sweet fruits or cakes for the bather to enjoy. The lord or lady steps into the bath, sinking into the hot, fragrant water. The sensation is one of pure, unadulterated bliss, a stark contrast to the cold, damp reality of medieval life, even for the wealthy. This is not a quick wash. A noble's bath is a long, leisurely affair, an activity that can last for an hour or more. It is a time for relaxation, for contemplation. Often, the bath was a semi-social event, even in private. The lord might conduct business from his tub, dictating letters to a scribe who sits at a respectful distance. The lady might chat with her closest ladies-in-waiting, who sit on benches nearby, their hands busy with embroidery, their conversation a low, pleasant murmur. Sometimes a musician would be brought in to play a soft melody on the lute, the gentle notes mingling with the sound of the splashing water and the crackle of the fire in the hearth. The entire process, from the heating of the water to the final drying, is a complex and labor-intensive ceremony, requiring the work of a dozen servants. It is a powerful statement of status, To be able to command this much labor, to use this much precious firewood, to enjoy this level of private, luxurious comfort, this was the true meaning of wealth and power in the Middle Ages. It was a world away from the shared, steamy, and chaotic democracy of the public stews. It was a private, fragrant, and carefully guarded paradise of water and warmth. To step from the lord's castle to the peasant's hovel is to step into another world, a world in which the concept of bathing is transformed from a luxurious ceremony to a rare and laborious necessity. For a peasant family like Arnaud's, a full-body wash was not a daily or even a weekly event. It was a significant undertaking, often reserved for major holidays like Christmas or Easter, or perhaps in the hot, sweaty months after the harvest. The process did not begin with the summoning of servants, but with the back-breaking labor of the family itself. The first and most difficult task was fetching the water. There was no plumbing, no pipes leading to the cottage. Every drop of water had to be hauled by hand from the nearest source, which could be a village well or a nearby stream, often a significant walk from the home. Elspeth or one of the older children would make trip after trip, their shoulders aching from the weight of 2 heavy wooden buckets suspended from a yoke. To fill a single bathtub required a dozen or more of these trips, a grueling expenditure of time and energy. While the water was being fetched, the tub itself was prepared. It was not the fine, linen-lined oak tub of the Lord. It was a simple, functional object, a large wooden wash tub, the same one used for laundry and for salting meat. It was dragged into the center of the one-room, smoky cottage, placed on the hard, packed earth floor, near the only source of heat, the central hearth. The next challenge was heating the water. A large iron cauldron was filled with water and hung over the fire on a heavy chain. The family had to use their precious, carefully rationed firewood to heat it. This was a slow process. As one cauldron of water heated, it was ladled into the tub, and a new one was put on to heat. The goal was not to create a hot, steaming bath, but simply to take the biting, icy chill off the water, to make it just barely lukewarm and tolerable. Finally, when the tub was full, the bath could begin. But it was not a private affair. It was a communal and highly ordered process conducted in the single, smoky room where the family lived, cooked, and slept. There was a strict hierarchy. The first to bathe was the most important person in the household, the father, the head of the family. He would strip down and step into the tub, the lukewarm water a welcome, if brief, relief from the grime and the sweat of a life of labor. He would wash himself, perhaps using a rough linen cloth, but rarely soap. Soap was a luxury. Most peasants used alternatives like a coarse paste of wood ash and animal fat, or certain plants like soapwort that could be worked into a lather. After the father was finished, he would step out, and the same water would be used by the next in line. Often this would be the sons, in order of age. Then came the women, the mother, Elspeth, and finally the daughters. The last person to use the water was usually the youngest child. By the end of the process, the water in the tub was no longer clean. It was a murky, gray, and soapy soup, but it had served its purpose. This was not seen as unhygienic. In a world where clean, hot water was an immense luxury, the idea of wasting it would have been unthinkable. This was a practical, efficient system, born of necessity. After the bath, the family would dry themselves with rough linen towels near the warmth of the fire. It was a rare moment of comfort and shared, simple luxury. The feeling of being clean, even for a short time, was a powerful morale boost, a small act of dignity in a life that was often filled with hardship and filth. But the work was not over. The heavy tub of dirty water had to be emptied, a task that required the combined strength of the husband and wife, hauling it to the door and tipping it out into the muddy track that served as their street. The bath from beginning to end was a major household chore, a significant investment of time, labor, and precious resources. It is no wonder that it was not an everyday event, but a rare and cherished ritual.
Given that a full-body bath was such a rare and laborious event, how did medieval people, both rich and poor, maintain a basic level of cleanliness and cope with the inevitable odors of daily life? The answer lies in a series of smaller, more frequent rituals, and a sophisticated culture of scent designed to mask what could not be washed away. For everyone, from the highest lord to the lowest peasant, the most important and most frequent act of washing was of the hands. Hands were washed before and after every meal, a practice driven as much by religious piety as by a practical understanding of hygiene. In a world where most people ate with their hands from communal dishes, clean hands were a sign of respect for your fellow diners. In a noble's castle, this was a ceremony in itself. Servants would move around the table with a silver ewer of warm, scented water and a basin, pouring the water over the hands of the guests, who would then dry them on a fine linen towel. For a peasant like Arnaud, it was a simpler affair. A quick rinse in a wooden bucket of cold water outside the cottage door. But the principle was the same. Faces were also washed daily, usually in the morning with cold water. For the wealthy, this might involve a scented soap. For the poor, it was simply a splash of cold water to wake the senses and wash away the grime of sleep. Linen, the fabric worn closest to the skin, in the form of chemises and undertunics, was the medieval equivalent of modern underwear, and it was the key to their hygiene. Linen is a highly absorbent fabric, and it was believed to draw the dirt and the sweat and the bad humors away from the body. While the heavy outer garments of wool or velvet might be cleaned only rarely, the linen undergarments were washed frequently, especially in wealthier households. A clean linen shirt, smelling of soapwort and sunshine, was a sign of a respectable person. It was this layer of clean linen, not the daily washing of the skin itself, that was the primary marker of personal hygiene for much of the population. But cleanliness alone was not enough to combat the smells of a world without modern sanitation or deodorants. The medieval world was a pungent place, and a sophisticated culture of scent arose to make it more bearable. For the wealthy, this meant perfumes. They used perfumes imported from the East, exotic and expensive scents of musk and ambergris and sandalwood. A noble lady would have a small silver pomander, a perforated ball filled with a solid block of fragrant wax, which she would hold to her nose in a crowded room to ward off the unpleasant odors of the common folk. In the home, both rich and poor used fragrant herbs to sweeten the air. Floors were strewn with fresh rushes and sweet-smelling herbs like meadowsweet and lavender, which would release their fragrance when walked upon. Bouquets of herbs were hung from the rafters. Clothes were stored in chests with bags of dried lavender to keep them smelling fresh. This was the complex reality of medieval hygiene. It was not a world of unwashed, filthy people who were afraid of water. It was a world that understood the importance of cleanliness, but which approached it in a different way. It was a world of practical, targeted washing, of a deep appreciation for the cleansing power of linen, and of a constant, fragrant battle against the inevitable and ever-present stenches of daily life. The Church in the Middle Ages had a complex and often contradictory relationship with the act of bathing. This relationship was at the heart of the medieval European view on hygiene, shaping customs and beliefs for centuries. On one hand, water was a powerful and essential symbol of purity. On the other, the places where people bathed were often seen as dens of sin and temptation. The most sacred use of water was, of course, the sacrament of baptism. This was the ritual that washed away the stain of original sin, welcoming a soul into the community of the Christian faithful. The immersion in holy water was a profound act of spiritual cleansing. This imbued the element of water itself with a deep mystical significance. Water could purify the soul. This belief subtly reinforced the idea that water could also purify the body,
And many people saw a simple bath as a small, personal echo of the great spiritual cleansing of baptism. Hospitals run by monastic orders, for example, placed a great emphasis on bathing for their patients, believing that cleaning the body was a necessary first step to healing the spirit. However, while the Church celebrated the spiritual purity of water, it looked upon the practice of public bathing with deep and growing suspicion. The public bathhouses, or the stews, with their mixed-gender bathing, their free-flowing wine, and their often open association with prostitution, were seen by many moralists and priests as a direct threat to the souls of their flock. They were seen as places of idleness, of vanity, and of lust. Preachers would rail against them from the pulpit, calling them gates to hell, where good Christians were tempted into sin by the pleasures of the flesh. This created a strange paradox. The act of washing was good, a reflection of spiritual purity, but the places where most common people could easily wash were seen as corrupting and sinful. This tension between the ideal of cleanliness and the perceived reality of the bathhouse would have a profound effect on the bathing habits of the medieval world. For the most devout, and particularly for the members of monastic orders, this tension was resolved through a strict and highly regulated approach to hygiene. Monasteries often had their own bathhouses, but their use was not a matter of pleasure or social enjoyment. It was a matter of discipline and necessity. The rules of the great monastic orders, like the Benedictines, laid out in precise detail when and how a monk was allowed to bathe. Bathing was often restricted to a few times a year, typically before major religious festivals like Christmas and Easter. It was seen as a necessary preparation for these holy days, a cleansing of the body to reflect the purification of the soul. The process was not a leisurely affair. It was a silent, functional, and communal ritual, stripped of all luxury and pleasure. The monks would enter the bathhouse in silence, wash themselves quickly and efficiently, and leave. There was no conversation, no feasting, no lingering. For some of the most extreme ascetics and saints of the era, the rejection of bathing became a powerful symbol of their devotion to God. In a world that, for the most part, valued cleanliness, the act of deliberately remaining unwashed was a radical and shocking statement. It was a form of penance, a mortification of the flesh. By rejecting the comforts and the vanities of the body, they believed they were bringing their souls closer to God. They embraced their own filth as a sign of their humility and their rejection of this sinful earthly world. The stories of these saints, like Saint Agnes, who is said to have never washed in her entire life, were told and retold, becoming part of the complex tapestry of medieval faith. It is these stories, the stories of the exceptional, the extreme, and the fanatical, that have largely contributed to our modern myth of a universally unwashed Middle Ages. But it is important to remember that these figures were seen as extraordinary because their behavior was so far outside the norm. For the vast majority of people, to be clean was to be decent, to be healthy, and to be closer to God. The idea of embracing filth was as strange and as shocking to them as it is to us.
For much of the High Middle Ages, from roughly the 11th to the early 14th century, the culture of bathing, both public and private, was a thriving and accepted part of life. But as the medieval period wore on, a series of profound social, religious, and medical shifts began to change this relationship with water, planting the seeds of the very myth of the great unwashed that we are now trying to dismantle. This change was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping tide of suspicion that gradually eroded the foundations of the bathing culture. The criticism from the Church, which had long been a constant but often ignored background noise, began to grow louder, more insistent, and more influential. The moral decay associated with some bathhouses, the gambling, the heavy drinking, the open prostitution, became a focal point for a new generation of reform-minded preachers. They saw the stews not just as places of harmless pleasure, but as symptoms of a deeper societal corruption, a rot that was eating away at the soul of Christendom. Imagine a fire and brimstone sermon in a crowded city church. A friar, his face thin and zealous, his voice ringing with righteous fury, would paint a vivid picture of the bathhouse as a gateway to hell itself. He would speak of vanity, of men and women preening their naked bodies, and affront to the humility that God demands. He would speak of sloth, of hours wasted in idle soaking and chatter, time that could have been spent in productive labor or in prayer. And above all, he would speak of lust. He would describe the mixed-gendered tubs as pits of temptation, where the sight of naked flesh would inevitably lead to sinful thoughts and then to sinful deeds in the private chambers upstairs. This constant, relentless condemnation, repeated in churches and cathedrals across Europe, began to have an effect. It slowly but surely changed public perception. The bathhouse, once seen as a wholesome and necessary part of urban life, began to be associated with sin, with disease, and with the lower, more disreputable elements of society. Respectable, God-fearing citizens, particularly women, were increasingly discouraged from frequenting them, lest their reputations be tarnished by association. At the same time, a quiet revolution was happening in the world of medicine. While the basic principles of the four humors remained, new ideas began to circulate among the university-trained physicians of the late Middle Ages. These were men who read the ancient texts of Galen and Hippocrates not as unchangeable dogma, but as a foundation for new theories. They began to see the body not as a simple container of fluids, but as a complex and porous organism, a fragile barrier against the dangers of the outside world. They developed and expanded upon the theory of miasma, the belief that disease was carried on bad air, foul-smelling vapors that rose from rotting matter, from swamps, and from the sick themselves. And they began to theorize that the skin, the body's outer defense, was not an impermeable shield. It was, they believed, covered in tiny, invisible pores, and these pores could open and close in response to the environment. From this idea came a new and terrifying conclusion. Hot water and steam were dangerous. They believed that a hot bath would open the pores of the skin, leaving the body in a weakened and vulnerable state. In this state, it was believed the body was like an undefended city with its gates thrown wide open, susceptible to the invasion of the poisonous miasmas that were thought to be the primary cause of all disease. The very act of opening the pores to cleanse the body was now seen as a direct invitation for sickness to enter it. It was a terrible and ultimately deadly irony. A physician might advise a patient to avoid bathing and instead to rely on dry cleaning methods, such as rubbing the body with a linen cloth and using heavy perfumes to mask any unpleasant odors. The fear of what could get in through the skin began to outweigh the desire to wash away what was on it. These shifting attitudes, both moral and medical, created a slow but steady decline in the popularity of public bathing. But the final, devastating blow, the event that would shatter the medieval bathing culture for centuries to come, was yet to arrive. It came in the year 1347, a dark shadow sailing from the east, carried on the backs of rats and the bites of fleas. It was the Black Death. While the physicians in their university halls were developing new theories about the dangers of open pores, another, more powerful idea was taking root in the hearts and minds of the common people, an idea spread by the church itself. This was the concept of asceticism, the belief that to achieve true spiritual purity, one must punish and deny the flesh. And in this worldview, the rejection of bathing became one of the most potent and visible symbols of extreme devotion. The lives of the saints, read out loud in church and recounted by traveling friars, were the most popular stories of the age. And these stories were filled with figures who embraced filth as a badge of honor. St. Agnes was said to have never washed in her entire life, her body so covered in grime that she was considered a living martyr. St. Anthony, one of the Desert Fathers, reportedly never let water touch his feet. These were not presented as tales of poor hygiene. They were presented as tales of heroic spiritual warfare. The logic was simple, if deeply alien to us now. The body was a vessel of sin, a source of temptation and vanity. To care for it, to perfume it, to take pleasure in its cleanliness, was to be a slave to worldly concerns. To neglect it, to allow it to become dirty and foul-smelling, to endure the bites of lice and fleas as a form of constant living penance, was to liberate the soul. This idea, the sainthood of filth, created a profound cultural paradox. On the one hand, the average person still valued cleanliness in their daily life. They washed their hands before meals, they kept their linen undergarments as clean as possible, and they enjoyed a trip to the bathhouse when they could. But on the other hand, they were taught to admire and revere these figures who had taken the opposite path. The unwashed hermit, the flea-bitten ascetic. These were not figures of scorn. They were spiritual athletes, champions of God, whose very stench was a sign of their holiness. This created a deep-seated ambiguity about the body itself. Was cleanliness a sign of decency and health, or was it a sign of vanity and a lack of piety? Was the pleasant scent of herbs and warm water a harmless comfort, or was it a dangerous temptation, a distraction from the more important work of saving one's soul? This theological unease, combined with the growing medical fear of bad air entering the body through open pores, created a perfect storm of suspicion around the act of bathing. The bathhouse, once a place of community and relaxation, was now seen through a new, more sinister lens. It was not just a place of potential sin, as the preachers had long claimed. It was now, according to the physicians, a place of potential death. The stage was set for a dramatic and catastrophic shift in European hygiene. The culture of bathing, which had survived the fall of Rome and flourished for centuries, was now balanced on a knife's edge. It would only take one great, terrifying push to send it plunging into a long, dark age of filth. And that push was about to arrive.
The theological doubts, the medical suspicions, the quiet shift in perception away from bathing, these were the slow, gathering clouds of a coming storm. But the storm itself, when it finally broke, was a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions, a force that would not just change bathing habits, but would shatter the medieval world to its very foundations. It arrived in the year 1347. It came from the east, a dark rumor carried on merchant ships, a story of a pestilence so swift and so deadly that it left entire cities empty in its wake. It arrived in Europe at a port in Sicily, and from there it began its relentless, inexorable march across the continent. It was the Great Pestilence, the Black Death. The disease was a terrifying, incomprehensible enemy. It came in several forms. There was the bubonic form, which caused great, swollen black boils, or buboes, to appear in the groin and the armpits, followed by a raging fever and usually death within a week. There was the pneumonic form, which attacked the lungs, was spread by coughing, and killed even more quickly. And there was the septicemic form, which infected the blood, causing the skin to turn dark and leading to death in a matter of hours. It was a force of nature that defied all medieval understanding. The physicians, with their theories of the four humors, were powerless. They tried their traditional cures, bleeding, purging, lancing the buboes, but nothing worked. The priests, with their prayers and their holy water, were equally helpless. The plague struck down the pious and the sinner, the rich and the poor, the clean and the unclean, with an absolute and terrifying impartiality. The scale of the death was apocalyptic. In the great, crowded cities,
The death toll was catastrophic. Half the population of Florence, of Paris, of London was wiped out in a matter of months. The social fabric of the world began to unravel. Fields were left unplowed, workshops fell silent, entire villages were abandoned, their houses left empty, their inhabitants all dead. The living were so overwhelmed by the sheer number of the dead that they could not even bury them properly. Great open pits were dug outside the city walls, and the bodies were thrown in, layer upon layer, like lasagna. In the face of this incomprehensible horror, the people searched for an explanation. Some said it was a punishment from God, a biblical plague sent to chastise a sinful world. Others blamed the stars, a malevolent alignment of the planets. And the physicians, in their desperate search for a rational explanation, a cause that could be understood and controlled, returned to their theories of miasma, of bad air. They reasoned that the plague must be carried on a foul, invisible vapor, a pestilential fog that rose from the earth, from rotting corpses, from stagnant water, and from the breath of the sick. This invisible cloud of death, they argued, could be breathed in, or, more terrifyingly, it could enter the body through the skin. And this is where the bathhouse, once a symbol of health and community, became the villain of the story. The leading medical minds of the day, particularly the influential faculty at the University of Paris, began to argue with a new and desperate authority that bathing, especially in hot water, was an act of suicide. They wrote treatises, advising kings and commoners alike, explaining their terrifying logic. A hot bath opened the pores of the skin. An open pore was a gateway, an undefended door through which the deadly miasma could pour into the body, causing an imbalance in the humors and leading to certain death. It was a piece of medical advice that was both profoundly wrong and tragically persuasive. In a world gripped by an inexplicable terror, any explanation, any course of action that promised even the slightest measure of control was seized upon with a desperate fervor. The moral condemnation of the Church, which had long simmered in the background, now found a powerful and terrifying new ally in the form of medical science. The preachers who had once railed against the bathhouses as places of sin now had a new sermon. The stews were not just a danger to the soul, they were a danger to the body. To enter a bathhouse was not just to risk damnation in the next world, it was to invite a swift and agonizing death in this one. The effect on society was swift and dramatic. The authorities, from kings and city councils down to local parish officials, began to act. The public bathhouses, the beloved social centers of the medieval city, were now seen as public health menaces, as epicenters of the plague. And so, across Europe, they were closed. The closure was not a gentle fading away, it was a sudden and often brutal shutdown. The doors of the stews were barred. The furnaces that heated the water grew cold. The great wooden tubs were emptied and left to dry and crack. The sound of laughter and conversation that had once filled these steamy halls was replaced by a dead, echoing silence. This was not a temporary measure. This was the end of an era. The fear of the plague and the medical theories that it had spawned became deeply ingrained in the European psyche. Even after the first great wave of the plague had passed, the suspicion of bathing remained. The bathhouses did not reopen. The culture of public bathing, a tradition that had survived for over 1,000 years, a direct legacy of the Roman Empire, was effectively extinguished in a single, terrified generation.
The closing of the bathhouses in the wake of the Black Death was not a temporary measure. It was a profound and lasting cultural shift, a turning point that would shape the Western world's relationship with water and the human body for the next 400 years. The fear of the plague and the medical theories it had spawned became deeply ingrained in the European psyche. The generation that survived the plague passed on its fears to its children, and they, in turn, passed them on to theirs. The idea that water, particularly hot water, was a dangerous, disease-carrying element became an accepted medical and social truth. Bathing, once a common and pleasurable activity,
became a rare, suspicious, and often feared one. In the centuries that followed, the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, the very periods we often associate with great leaps forward in science and culture, personal hygiene, by our standards, declined precipitously. The wealthy elite, who had once enjoyed daily, fragrant baths, now adopted a new philosophy of dry cleaning. They would change their fine linen undergarments frequently, as the linen was still believed to draw out the body's impurities. But the skin itself was often left unwashed for weeks or even months at a time. Cleanliness became a matter of appearance, not of actual hygiene. It was about having a clean collar, clean cuffs, and a powdered wig to cover dirty hair. Perfume, once used to enhance the scent of a clean body, was now used as a heavy, cloying mask to hide the stench of an unwashed one. The courts of great kings like Louis XIV at Versailles were famously splendid and famously foul-smelling. For the common people, the closure of the public bathhouses meant the loss of their primary and often only means of achieving a full-body wash. They were left to their own devices, to the occasional laborious bath in a wooden tub in their own homes. And so the stereotype of the great unwashed was finally and ironically born. The very fear of a great disease had created the very conditions of filth in which other diseases could thrive. It was not until the 19th century, with the scientific discovery of germ theory by pioneers like Louis Pasteur, that the Western world began to slowly, cautiously rediscover the bath. When scientists finally understood that disease was caused not by bad air, but by microscopic organisms, the old fears of open pores and miasmas were finally laid to rest. The public bathhouse made a comeback, and the idea of regular hot bathing as a cornerstone of public health was reborn. But the memory of the medieval bathing culture with its strange, steamy, and social world was lost to time, replaced by a persistent myth of universal filth. It's a tragic irony that the Middle Ages, an era that for centuries maintained a vibrant and complex relationship with bathing, is now remembered as the dirtiest of times. The truth is that they did not stop bathing because they were ignorant or backwards. They stopped because they were terrified. They were the victims of a catastrophic pandemic and of a medical theory that was tragically and fatally wrong. And so the bath, which was once a symbol of life, of health, and of community, became a symbol of death.